Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of the 20-ton shop press rebuild and modifications. It's finally happened, folks. We're finally ready to reassemble the 20-ton air over hydraulic jack. Now, certain things of note due to the inverting of this jack. I've been over this before in other videos, but this is the collar that has the breather in it for when the jack's in a normal position to, I assume, vent air and create a vacuum port when the piston moves up and down in the jack to compensate for air movement in your hydraulic fluid reservoir. So, JB weld, folks. I've JB welded the hole up. Sort of seen in there. I just put a bit of masking tape on the inside to flatten it off. Then I actually chamfered the outside of the hole to give me a bit more surface area and a bit of a V for the JB weld to go into. I always find when you're filling holes, putting a chamfer really helps, instead of having like just a cylindrical hole bored through something where whatever you've got in there can be kind of pushed through or dislodged. If you create a chamfer, it gives you more surface area and stops, you know, plugs being able to be sort of pushed through from one side and all that sort of thing. Okay, so that's how we've dealt with that issue. Now, all this arises from the jack being permanently inverted, which it was never designed to do, and in my opinion, if it was left as it came from the factory, it would either weep or drip hydraulic fluid when it's permanently in that inverted position. It may not be something you would notice if you just had the jack on its side and managed to use it for whatever, you know, or using the jack in other situations, but I think in a permanently inverted situation, it would leak. Alright, onto the hydraulic fluid reservoir. You can see that I've repaired all the imperfections in it from grinding off their crappy handle and the punched in mark that I'd welded up where the old drain and fill port was. So that's ready for paint. Now what I'm going to deal with here is the area where these two sort of come together. This was obviously never meant as a super duper seal because the jack's always in that position, and you would very rarely even probably notice if it did weep a bit around this area and also where it seals down over your the ram section of the jack. But with it being permanently inverted, we need to pay extra attention to this. So what I'm going to do to get around that, Permatex High Performance Thread Sealer, folks. I'm going to put thread sealer on the top of these threads, which will seal up this thread where it winds down, that which will seal the inner side of the hydraulic fluid reservoir. Now, as far as the outside seal on the hydraulic fluid reservoir, this guy here, I really don't know where everything bottoms out on the assembly of the jack, and whether or not this seal, which is just basically a plastic ring, was ever designed to hold anything more than the occasional, you know, bit of stuff when the jack fell over or was possibly used on one side for a very short period of time. So what I'm going to do, I'm using a bit of Loctite master gasket, and I'm going to be putting that on the face of this before I put the plastic ring on, and then I will put you know, some more gasket maker over the ring before I sort of put the two together, and hopefully that'll all sort of sandwich together enough to give us a really good seal. So they're really the only two areas that need to be taken care of. The original seal down here where the cylinder actually squashes into, it's sort of a rubber seal that's sort of U-shaped and it pushes in there. That's a pretty good seal anyway, which obviously, because the jack's been designed to sit in this position, it's the main point where it's going to leak. But now with the jack inverted and your hydraulic fluid level's probably going to be here, that seal's never really going to see much fluid anyway. So I'm not too concerned about getting it back together and having that seal, which I assume it will because it is a proper rubber seal anyway. But it'll never be in a position where it'll leak hydraulic fluid in its new location, being inverted under the being inverted in the press. So let's get it together, eh? So the first thing we need to do, folks, is get a bit of thread sealer on this thread here. It only comes down about halfway, so yeah, I'm just trying to get rid of any big lumps of sealant, folks, because you obviously don't want bloody gobs of this stuff below the, and ending up below the threads and getting into your hydraulic fluid. Just one of those things, unfortunately. I was actually thinking about putting the thread sealer in here, but I was concerned that as it went down it would have squirted up between this edge here and ended up being trapped between the ram and the cylinder there, which would have probably even been worse. So next thing we've got to do is refit this O-ring in here. There's an O-ring that, this is the sort of wiper O-ring for the hydraulic ram that came out of there. There's that guy. Now, gasket maker. Like I say, I'm going to be very sparing with this. Probably going to squirt a bit out, folks, when I get it together, but what do you do? Now I'm actually going to put a real little bit just around the inside of that, just a real smear, just to sort of help with this thread sealing and the top of this, but I don't want to have enough on there that it's going to potentially sort of squeeze out. So just enough to kind of potentially seal this without creating any sort of an excess squeezing problem. So I think that's pretty good. I think what we've got there set up now is pretty bloody good. So I'll just whack a tiny little bit of hydraulic fluid on that O-ring. I think we're pretty good to go. Final check. I think we've got it all, folks. I think we are good to go. Hopefully this will seat back into this guy pretty well. That's probably the only issue. Yeah, I think our original plug was sitting sort of at a little slight angle. It does seem to fit in the seal a little bit better, so I don't think this is completely perfectly round. So obviously you want to give it the most chance of kind of going back where it came from. So ideally I'd like that lined up perfectly, but I just don't think I'm going to be able to get it, folks. It just seems to want to, I've had it apart several times and it just seems to want to be slightly off center as it is there every single time. Getting this down into this seal down the bottom here, folks, is probably going to be the biggest issue, that I don't catch the edge of it. So if I catch the edge of it, it's probably going to fuck it. And it's really kind of not super happy. Yeah, you can see it's sort of out of shape, and don't stress it out too much before it's actually going down into the seal properly. Oh yeah, that seems pretty good. Maybe a couple more turns and then I'll sort of try and locate it where I want it. See if this will do the job. Looks like we might be able to line it up properly now. Perfect. It's pretty bloody tight, folks. Final nip up with a hammer and punch. I reckon that's pretty bloody good. I don't think we're going to do any better than that. Fingers crossed, folks, yours seals up. Might try a bit of acetone on it, folks. It's probably going to attack the primer, but we really like to get all this off considering we're going to be painting it. Bit of wax and grease remover, folks. I don't know how it'll go with this with a gasket maker. It doesn't look like it dissolves it, but certainly going to keep it nice and clean for us. Rightio, folks, I'm just going to see if I can pump some air into it just to try and raise the ram up a bit, just to make sure I don't have any goop underneath it. But takes a bit to compress air. Oh, here we go. I figure this won't leak because it's a sucking in port. But as you can see, it's compressing the air and just sort of slowly pushing that up, which is great. Yeah, it's not the best thing for working on a hydraulic jack with. Anyway, it's done what I wanted, folks. I just wanted to see if there was any sort of crap, and there's a little bit on there of the gasket maker. It's probably going to be trapped under the O-ring anyway. What do you do? I've given it my best shot, folks. I've given it my best shot. Might just put a tiny bit of hydraulic oil around here, just to sort of help that O-ring once again. And I'm just going to have to live with it and clean it up later when I paint. But really, just trying to make sure that O-ring isn't under too much pressure, because I have got everything very clean and it's not really lubricated. Anyway, you get the idea. That's pretty good, other than the fact that I splashed crap everywhere. So far so good anyway, folks. We'll give all that a little bit of time to cure, and possibly in the meantime get a bit of paint on it, just because I'm probably going to have to paint it in this position. If I fill it up with hydraulic fluid, it's going to leak out of the drain and fill port, which isn't really ideal. And because it's oil, it's kind of going everywhere. Oil and paint aren't the best of friends. So I guess now we wait, folks. Alrighty, we'll leave it there and I'll be back. Weather outside's a bit crap to do any painting at the moment, folks, so I thought we might take a look at the existing press, which is going to be the frame for the modifications and everything to take place in. As you can see, it's just a cheap Chinese 20-ton press. This is quite an old one actually. I've had this for probably a good 15 years, I reckon. Now you can see it's a very basic design. It's a bolt together unit just with your standard 20-ton hydraulic jack on it, and the only modification that I've made to it so far is I fitted a hand wheel to the top. So I might just have a look at that. So you can see the hand wheel on here, folks. This is just to give you adjustment with your pressing height sort of thing, so that you can go in between heights where the dowels go through and hold the table in sort of thing. It was a reasonable modification. It worked pretty well, you know, but not something that we'll be using when we finish redoing all these mods. You can see the size of these springs too in comparison. This is one of the new springs off the air over hydraulic jack, and you can see that is a much smaller spring. Reason being that these springs not only have the duty to retract the ram, but they also have to lift the whole jack and this bar assembly. All the weight is being borne by these springs when you want to recompress the jack or the ram. So that's the reason why these have to be so big. Obviously when the jack is reconfigured to how I want it, all this will be gone. This piece here will no longer be there, and we'll go back to using the small springs that come with the air over hydraulic jack, because when it's all inverted, the only job that those springs then need to do is just to pull back the ram. There's none of this stuff to lift. It doesn't have to lift itself or anything. So you can see I've got a couple of C-clamps on here just to try and hold the jack a little bit steady in position, because how it comes, there's no location for this. It just basically sits on top of this bar, and it always used to just flail around really badly, and it was just a giant pain in the bum. And also this business here with this, you know, all this kind of movement. So whenever you were trying to press anything, it just moves around. It's just absolutely really sucks. Admittedly, I probably could have squashed these in a little bit to sort of lessen that, but you know, it's just not a real great setup. So I've been planning this build out over the years actually to try and work out you know, the best way to do this. And when I came across one of these air over hydraulic jacks on eBay, I thought, yep, that's what I'll do. But first of all, I've got to work out whether I can actually invert the jack and make it function how I want to. So I'm pretty much committed now, so whatever I do, I'm sort of stuck with it. So basically what I have to do is remove all of this, get this top beam off, and this beam here is welded together. They obviously have a large plate on the bottom of this, which is welded into position, and there's also braces, and there's some sort of heavy rods that run through this section that the springs hook onto. So I'm going to have to remove that section in one piece and then cut all that stuff out of it, because I want these two pieces to be separate again, so that there's nothing stopping me from sliding the new head from left to right. And really the only reason they've done this is just to sort of keep it together. It doesn't actually need to be welded together because it's bolted together on the sides through these uprights. If I feel it needs it, if I notice any sort of deflection, if it wants to kind of balloon out when it's pressing, I can always weld some tabs in positions that are suitable for me at a later date. But at the moment, first thing I've got to do is get this thing apart and then cut through all the welds and clean this thing up. here it is, folks, in all its glory. It's quite wonky how it's been welded together. It's sort of out of parallel and out of twist, and it's just not super great. So basically what we've got to do is just cut through all this stuff and re-separate these pieces. Some bloody big welds on there, but I reckon I can do it. So bear with me, folks. I'll just get this bastard of a thing all cut apart. That sorts out that, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, I don't see why we can't just sort of do a bit of a quick and dirty rough assembly, just to see how it's all going to go. So basically, folks, that's it there. Well, that's not too bad. It all seems to fit at this stage, just sort of roughly. Yeah, it's very interesting. And this is the idea behind how I've got it mounted, folks. It's all a bit wonky at the moment, so it's a little bit sort of stiff to move, but the fact that you can slide the head from one side to the other if you happen to be pressing something that's a really sort of weird shape, and it's beneficial to have it sort of on one side. That was the idea anyway. I thought it's really not that big a deal to create this mount rather than just weld it in the one spot, when basically all we do is just nip these 4 bolts up when it's roughly, you know, I'll have a center point marked for it, so you can always return it back to center, and then it's just a matter of doing these up. Like I say, they're 3/8 bolts that were cut down. Their only purpose is just to suspend it, because obviously any force pressing is going in that direction, and it's just going to be pushing it harder against these. So once it's all properly squared up, which it's wonky as anything at the moment, as soon as I release this off the top, being that it's all bolted, it all kind of twisted and turned to crap. But what I'll probably do is, once I get this beam section properly aligned, I'll probably weld some more plates on it, just somewhere out of the way so it's not going to interfere with me. Just to keep this section sort of properly aligned. It looks like I can just weld a piece over the end that won't interfere on each one, and possibly even run a bolt through the center that I can just take in and out as I want to slide it around. I'll see. Realistically, it probably doesn't need anything, but at least it kind of gives me that option. So at least you get the idea with it, folks. You can kind of see where I was thinking when I was setting this up. So as you know, it's got the air pump on the back. It'll have a foot switch. I do have quite a lot of accessories planned for this thing. I already have some, and I've just got to make up an adapter and a few things on the lathe for this, and it should turn out pretty well. But once again, everything relies on this working in the way that I've envisaged that it will. But the first thing I've got to do is get some paint on this so that I can sort of start mounting it all. But that's not bad for a dry assembly, folks. You get the idea. So I just cracked the shits with it, folks. I've just been making measurements and stuff and trying to get this this press frame right, and to get it all square and, you know, parallel and everything like that, I ended up having to elongate a lot of these holes in here because it just didn't go together properly. These two pieces here that you saw me separate that were once welded together, I discovered that they'd been welded with one up the wrong way. Like, the steel has a slight difference in shape. The flange on one edge is kind of angled slightly and another flange is flat, and it's obviously been cut out of one length of steel, but when they've welded it together from the factory, they've flipped one piece, so you had these kind of two different sides, and it made it just really wonky. So at least separating it, it allowed me to correct that and put them both up the one way, with the flattest section of the flange on the bottom where the press will be pushing up against, or where the cradle will be pushing up against. And I tried to sort of re-bolt it together, but it just wouldn't stay in the right position no matter what, and I thought, oh, this is just going to be absolutely crap. So I bit the bullet and I've actually welded the whole thing up. You can sort of see here, it's just all welded now. I'll leave the bolts in there. The bolts are just kind of sitting in there, not really doing much. I guess it adds a little bit of extra shear strength to it all. But yeah, I cracked the shits and just welded the whole thing. Really not 100% necessary, but just because, you know, I've got the welder sitting here, and like I say, I just couldn't get it to stay where I wanted it to. It would just kind of push out of parallel a bit and things like that, and it's like, well, I'm going the whole hog with this press. I want to get everything done on it all in the one go and not have to sort of revisit things again, because I am going to repaint this frame, and the last thing I want to be doing is welding on this frame once it's painted. So anyway, folks, it's actually all welded together. I'll leave the bottom bolted, not that you can really see, because the bottom doesn't really do anything other than kind of you know, keep it sort of vertical. So the force is only really located between the top beam and the pressing table, wherever that is, and how that kind of holds together. And another motivation was because of the fact that I can now slide the head of the press across to one side. I didn't want the force of pressing things forcing the frame out of square. And as I say, because I had to elongate a lot of the holes, it just literally wouldn't stay where I wanted it to, you know. So welding it up was the best thing to do. It's not like I ever pull it apart. That you know, they obviously made these things bolt together so they could ship them. And it looks like we've got a reasonable day outside, folks, so I might be able to get a bit of painting done. Weather's come good again, folks. You can see we've got a bit of painting going on. I've got the majority of the jack assembled over there in one piece. It's got a coat on it. I don't know if you can see, but over there hanging, I've got all sorts of various bits and pieces. That's all the final sort of colour. That's an epoxy enamel. And I've got the press stand here, just in an undercoat, because I've got to weld a whole heap of plates for accessories and stuff on it at this stage. I just wanted to get undercoat on it, just to stop it rusting where I welded it up, and also where I cut all the brackets off. So you see my little setup here, a table full of crap. I'm about to blow the second coat on all this stuff. There it is, folks. That's our modified, ready to be inverted air over hydraulic jack, all painted. Just a bit of a rough assembly. Things like the air pump are just sort of sitting on there just to sort of keep it all together, so I didn't muck it up while it was drying. It's nice and dry now. As you can see, that's our reversed hand pump. It's all looking pretty good, basically ready to be mounted onto the jack frame. So I've now turned my main focus to the press frame, folks, and as you can see, there are tabs welded onto it and plates and bits and pieces here and there, which we'll go over in the next video. So if you've been following the 20-ton press build, folks, I hope it's met up to your expectations so far. Obviously the videos will keep coming until this thing's finished and we've got this sucker working again. So as always, folks, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Bloody pleasure to have you here. Remember to subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment, folks, if you've got any questions about anything. It helps feed the YouTube algorithm and helps YouTube share my videos. And as always, folks, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.